No problem. So like we had just created, like in our books, we had our, before we had a book with just a field of authors, but now we've updated our database for a many-to-many. So books have many chapters, authors have many chapters, and then through chapters, a book can find its way to its author. From authors, a author can find its way through chapters to the books that it's been in. So now we're here in our, oops, that's gonna break something. I know it didn't, I just scrolled. Cool. So in here we've created 3 new authors, and we already have a book that's associated with some chapters. So one thing that we could do is build like how we're going to connect across this many-to-many join, right? So we have 3 authors. Let's get this book back. Was book.find with ID 38. And so if I wanted to associate this book with a couple of these authors, this book already has some chapters that we could add the author's IDs on. Let's try that out. Book.chapters gives us these 3 chapters with, or 4, 1, 2, 3, and 5. All of these have book ID of 38. That's why it's this book's chapters, right? That's how Active Record figured out what query to write. Because when we called book.chapters, it pulled the ID and made sure that the book ID was included in the query. So now we need to add these author IDs. So I can call author.IDs to know which IDs I've got. Select authors.id from authors. Oh no. Well, guess what happened? I called author.new 3 times, but I didn't save those authors. So I don't have any authors in the database. No problem. Perfect. Now we call author.IDs 1, 2, 3. Great. So the chapters that we had, I think were like 1, 2, 3, 5. Book.chapters, or sorry, 1, 2, 3, 5. Cool. So what we could potentially do here is say like chapter dot find 1. We'll set that to C. We found this chapter. If we want to set that first author on this chapter, we could do it manually. We could say c.authorid equals 1, c.save. That should now associate author ID 1 with those chapters, right? So I say like king. Great, and I say king.chapters. Great again, right? It like added a chapter. If the chapter didn't show up, that's where I would have said, by the way, king.reset to make sure that like the object, oh no, undefined method, reset for author. Did I mean rescue? No, I did not. Maybe reset's a Rails thing. Let me try reload. That works just fine. So depending on the version of code that you're working in, I'm thinking that reset might just be a Rails thing, or it might be a newer version of Active Record than what we've got loaded up for this challenge that contains reset. But yeah, I think that some people have managed to use it successfully in their code too, so it might be down to versions. In any case, this would be the piece, since I knew that I added that chapter to the author, if the author object wasn't telling me the truth about that recent like move to the database, that's where calling .reload would refresh it, and then if I called king.chapters again, then I'll get the true truth from the database at that point in time. So I think that answers your first question a little bit. We didn't see the fail case here. In both cases here we're hitting the database.
It's not a class method,
it's an instance method for any Active Record instance. Reload, David, we were talking about at the beginning, because sometimes you have like, I have an object that's associated with 3 things. I get it associated with like a 4th thing, and then I ask like objects.associated things, and I still just see those first 3. Because sometimes Active Record holds in the Ruby space like a local memory of all the association objects, and it doesn't update them as often as you'd like them to sometimes. So sometimes you have to type reload. You have to call reload on one instance, which forces Active Record to basically refresh all of the associations around that object, like go get a fresh one from the database basically, to make sure that anything else that's happened in the database since we last retrieved the object is reflected in the reality of that object. So that was for chapter 1. If we said here, what's a faster way we could do this? King.chapters, what were we doing? We called chapter, author ID 1. What if I said here, chapter.find 2.update? I know that update is going to change information on an object and save it to the database at the same time. If you're doing editing stuff, you're probably calling update at some point, or you might be calling assign attributes and then save. That could work too, but I want to do this all in one shot. So I'll say .update author. king. Notice I'm not setting the author ID. Like before I said author ID was king.id or author ID was 1. I can say author here because I'm technically calling chapter.author equals king, like as this gets run inside of this. And as long as chapter has a method called author, I should be right as rain. And it does not right now, right? It only belongs to book. It doesn't belong to author. Oh no. So look, I can make this change here, and I think it's going to catch it next time around. But right now, I think we're going to see exactly why this notation will not work, right? We just saw why. Unknown attribute author, because at the time that we tried calling author as king, that didn't work. What writer I do have is author ID, because that's living on my schema right now. Right? The chapter database table definitely has something called author ID. That's distinct from the behavior author that I wanted to write what this belongs to. So if I wanted to amend this one real quick, I'd say update author ID. That's something I'm allowed to set in this pry instance with king.id. That works, that saves to the database. We still have 3 and 5 to hit. So let me exit out and try using the association more. Rate console, chapter.third.author equals author dot first. Oops. Let me do an update, because that's what I really want to do, is update what's in the database. Update where author is author dot first. That runs. First, it has to figure out what author dot first is, right? Oh, well, really, first we have to figure out what we're updating. So it finds the chapter that's third, then it finds the first author to set the value, and then it runs the update SQL, update chapters, set the author ID to such and such, and then if we look at chapter.third, there's our chapter with ID 3, book ID 38, author ID is 1. Cool, cool. So what's another way that we could potentially do this? We could start from the perspective of the author, right? Because an author has many chapters. So we could do that shovel thing again. We could say like chapter.find, oops, let's say chapter equals chapter.find 5. And then I could say king equals, author.first. And I can say king.chapters shovel chapter. So now if I look at chapter.all, oh, and that one was supposed to be unassigned for now. So I have and there's chapter 4, which I didn't see because it was on its own line because it was such a short title. So yeah, we'll have author ID to 1 on all 4 of these, but then this one in the middle here, let's set a different author ID. So cool, chapter.find 4, we'll update it where the author ID is 2. So now if I say author.first, chapters, we get a list of chapters for the author. If we say author.first.books, we get a list of books that are associated with the author. Notice that we get 1 book back per chapter, right? Because Active Record literally goes through chapters to figure out which books an author has. So because I have 3 chapters written in the same book or more, I'm getting 3 copies or more of that same book, right? Since this author wrote 4 chapters in the same book, when we call .books, we end up getting back a non-unique list. So I should probably call like .unique on this to see like, oh yeah, that's the book that I've written in as an author. What do you think is going to happen if I create a new book and say author.books shovel the new book? Let's try this. I'll say new book equals book.new. I'm not even going to put it in the database yet. Book.new title Grapes of Wrath. My baby beluga problem in the American Dust Bowl. It's like the most mashup book ever. Raffi Steinbeck. Cool. So we've created this book, and it doesn't have an ID. It's not in the database yet, but we do have a variable new book, right? If I say king, that's my first author. So if I say author.books or king.books, looking at this association, how does an author have a book? it has many books through chapters. So if I'm say king.books, shovel, new book, what am I telling Active Record to do?
Add the book to the array of books.
Yeah, it wants me to add this new book to the array of books that would return when I call king.books, right? But how does that array get returned when I call king.books? What has to happen in the database? Let's look. If I call king.books right now,
Create or update.
let's look at the query. Select books from books, inner join chapters, where books ID is chapters book ID, and then we're only looking on chapters that belong to this author. So it looks like the author has to go through chapters to find its way to its books. Does that make sense? Like, as my author ID, kind of almost read it backwards. I'm author ID 1, so I'm looking for certain chapters that belong to me, where chapters are author ID 1. I'm going to join those chapters with the books that are also referred to on those chapters, and then I'll return just those books. So it's like, hey, I've got these 5 chapters. Each one of those chapters refers to a different book. That's how I know what my books are.
It has to go to the table to get the join.
It's got to go through the join, basically, to get to the other
So
side.
it goes through all the cache or whatever.
Basically, in this case, when I called king.books, I think it did go back to the database. If I call king.books again, will it go back to the database the second time? I don't think it did. Yeah, notice the second call, I don't have SQL here. So like if I change something in the database here, like here's a book that's got ID 38. Let's say that I say book dot, if I deleted the 38th book, right? Book dot find 38 dot destroy. There goes book number 38, right? If I say book dot find 38, it's gone. I say king.books, I still have books, right? This is because I've done something to get the books out of the database for the king, so now they're sitting in that cache. It's not, notice once again, no database query happened, right? It just took the existing Ruby value of king.books and like spit it back out to me, even though we know that book ID 38 no longer is in the database. So now if I call like king.reload, now we actually go and get this fresh one out of the database, and that causes Active Record to manually search for books again when I call king.books. And now we get an empty array back instead of that old array that like had books in it. Does that mean I still have those chapters in there? Chapter.all? Sure we do, right? It still refers to a book ID of 38. That book isn't in the database anymore. There is something that you can say like has many chapters, dependent destroy true from the perspective of book. If you ever see dependent destroy, that basically means if I'm the parent and I have kids that depend on me and I'm gone, like they're gone too, because this is caveman times. Basically, like we're not gonna have any like kids that don't belong to anybody running around because like they shouldn't be in our database if they can't point anywhere. That's real. But like, coming back to the shovel question, right? Let's make a new book. We have that book, right? New book. So that's our new book. This is our author. The book doesn't have an ID. If I say king.books, shovel new book, what's happening? Let's check out some documentation for why the shovel is even a thing. In the Ruby on Rails API, the relationship between an author and books is that an author has many books through something else. So I'm going to say has many. As many. Oh, you know what? I'm probably zoomed in a little bit. No, I just have a weird, okay, let's cut off a little bit. In any case, has many. Cool. Specifies a one-to-many. The shovel adds one or more objects to the collection. So if I say king.books shovel, it will attempt to add a new book to the collection of king.books, right? By setting their foreign keys to the collection's primary key. So that tells us that Active Record is going to make this true through the database, right? Through the data, we will make the relationship real. If I said like, hey, everybody with a mitten that says their initials on it, like, is allowed to go, right? And then I said, like, hey, can you add somebody to the list of people that's allowed to go? What you're really telling me to do is put initials on their mitten, right? Because I just told you that rule. If I told Active Record the way an author connects to books, is through chapters. When I say let's add to the author's books collection, Active Record's like, the only way I can do that is through chapters. So here it says, note this operation instantly fires update SQL, and then it says also, this will also run validations and callbacks of associated objects. This basically means like if it's got the wrong info, it won't allow it to save. It is looking across the database and any associated objects that are required. That's another hint that when we try to say king.books shovel new book, what we're going to end up needing to do is create a new instance of chapter, because the only way that a king has this many-to-many relationship with books is because there's a row in the chapters table that has the king ID and the book ID in it. So if this is going to become true, Active Record needs to put a row in the chapters table with new books ID in it and with king's ID in it as the book ID and author ID. Problem here is that the book doesn't even have an ID. I think what's going to happen in order is Active Record's first going to go like, okay, let's get this book an ID. Because if it's going to need to be on a chapter associated with this author, then I can't just have a chapter pointing to nil. It needs to point to something. Let's give this book an ID to point to. After saving the book, I think Active Record is going to try to save a chapter connecting the author to the book. Let's see. Yep. So the first thing it does is it took new book and inserted that info into the books. Why? Because now it has an ID, because it's been saved to the database. So then we insert into chapters with book ID and author ID, and the book ID is the new ID that we've just assigned to the saved book. Author ID is still 1, because that's like Stephen King's ID, and that's kind of how the shovel is designed to work. Even if I was connecting like through 5 different join tables, Active Record can still handle this. So it's a very powerful tool, this shovel, because all I need to ask it is make this connection happen, right? Did I decide what the title of this chapter is when I created it? Because I put a chapter in the database, right? Like, this definitely happened. Insert into chapters. We put a book ID on the chapter. We put an author ID on the chapter. And we set those according to these two things. That means that we should be able to find, like, the latest chapter, right? Chapter.last. And take a look. It's got that book ID. It's got the author ID. That chapter doesn't actually have a title on it, like, at all. So the danger of using a shovel is if you get outside of the scope that you're in right now, where like a view only points to a user in a movie. What if a view had something like a number of times? Like every time I view the movie, it just increments a counter, right? If I needed to associate a user with a movie, it would be my job to make sure that that view's initial counter value was set to like 1 or something like that, because Active Record won't take care of that detail on its own. I could set a default title for a chapter, like on the migration. I could also set a callback in the model. We'll play around more with both of those options in the next mod. But yeah, this is an important thing to connect to, that if an author connects to a book through the join, but the join has fields that don't explicitly do the joining, those fields will be left blank, because Active Record just strives to do the bare minimum required of it to make that join come true. Yeah, that to me is like the shovel in a nutshell, and this shows that there's a lot more that can go on under the hood, right? Active Record is just kind of frantically trying to make this tell the truth, and to do it, it realized I need a chapter, but to set a chapter, I need a book ID, so it made the book before making the chapter. But when it made the chapter, it didn't say I need a title, so the chapter does connect to this author that did this book, but the author right now is like uncredited, I guess, like they don't have any page that would have a title and their name on it as well. But of course I could play with that too. What I was saying before about like assign attributes versus new, have you ever used the assign attributes method before? So what's the difference between new and save?
New is you create the object, save actually implement it.
Very good, right? So if I say like Ron equals author dot new, name R Burgundy. So now we have Ron. Ron doesn't have an ID because I just called author.new, right? If I want this author to live in the database, then I can call what? Ron.save. Cool. So .save always takes an object and puts it in the database, right? And notice that it detected that there was no ID, so it did an insert into. What if I took an object out of the database and changed it and then saved it? Would I still be doing an insert into, or would I be doing something else? I'd be doing update SQL, because that thing was already in the database. I don't want to change the number of rows. I just want to change the data that's in one of them. So for that example, we could get that chapter.last. C equals chapter.last. There's our chapter. It's got no title, right? So now let's say that I wanted to do the equivalent of new, but without saving, right? Because if I call c.update, I could pass in title, some new title. The problem here is that update is going to do it all for me. Update is like create, right? It's going to change this instance, and it's going to fire that update SQL in one step. And I might want to break it up into 2 steps because I might want to like take my time and like make sure I get each piece the way I want it to. So instead of update, the equivalent of new when you have an existing object in the database is going to be assign attributes. And so now we look at C, and we've set the title. But we'll also see that C, if we called chapter.last from the database, we'd have a chapter that still has a nil title. So my object is updated beyond what my database knows about. Now I can call c.save. There's that update SQL that we were talking about, like saving that chapter into the database. Yeah.
I get a question about another problem. I think it's a problem.
Yeah.
I'm running into, which is so we got 2 tables. We got the users, the movies, and as a Bini through relationship through the views.
Yes.
So when we create a view object, we have to pass in IDs.
Yes.
So, like normally, when I remember doing this with Ruby, we'd usually do that with objects.
Sure.
So there's really no good way of doing that with active record that I can see because it's linked into the underlying database.
You
The
can.
way we're doing it now, we have to find the ID for each object and implement it into the
Yeah, I think you're gonna see that happen. Like honestly, like finding an ID. This is how it really works, right? One of the main points of this project is to hit this friction exactly the way that you're hitting it. Where like every time I want to do something for a user, I need to show them all their options. I need to listen to the option that they took, and then based on that option, I need to either retrieve an object or pull in, like, set an ID somewhere. I think this is all, like, on some level, literally just what we kind of need to do. If I was concerned with, let's say that in this app, in our runner, because I have, like, a basic runner, and it just basically does this. So, welcome to Bookishly. Want to see some books? Please select yes or no. Yes, I do. There's some books. And then it says like yes or no to see these books again or exit to leave. And then I just can keep looking at the books, or I can say no. And then it keeps asking for new commands and I keep saying no. Okay, you're lost, pal. And then eventually I just say like exit and then it lets me out, right? So in here we could play around with this idea of let's create a new instance of chapter, right? What I could do in my runner is add an option real quick. So we'll say yes, no, sure. If the choice is no, I'm going to say puts, cool, you are gonna write a chapter then. And then I might do something like this, puts book.all. And then do a puts, please type an ID from the above list. And we'll say book ID equals gets.chomp. And if we really want to save it as an ID, we can make sure that we save it as a 2i, because whenever you call gets.chomp, it takes in a string, even if the user used numeral characters. And then I'd also want to do something else. I want to say like puts author.all, and then do puts, please type an ID from the above author list. I should be clear about what I'm doing here. And then we'll take another gets.chomp and call it author ID. This feel kind of familiar? Like in terms of like, I need to get each of these kind of by themselves. And then once I've got book ID and author ID, I could say puts.
Ours actually does something like this.
Finally, name your chapter. Yeah, there's not really a ton of different ways to like get input or tell stuff to users when we're at this like CLI level. And then I'll say here like title equals gets dot chomp dot, oh, we don't need to 2i that. Cool. So now we have a title, a book ID, and an author ID. So then I could say chapter dot create title is title, book ID is the book ID that we just set, and author ID is the author ID. And then I think if we did like this, like C equals, we could do a puts, you've added a chapter by the chapter. We could use our associations more, c.author.name to the book called, and then we could use this chapter to also talk to the book on the other side, c.book.title. Oh, and then we'll add the chapter title, which will just be c.title. Cool. Let's try this out. Slightly patronizing flow, but we'll go through it and try it out. Oh yeah, by the way, book.all, I know that's going to make like nice readable books, because when we were playing with this, I wrote a 2s method on book, and I should probably take away the by authors, because we don't have authors living on the book anymore. I should close this string so that that doesn't break. But I do want to do something similar to this for author. Cool, let's run it and see what happens. Bookishly. Do I want to see books? No, I don't. I want to make stuff. Please type an ID from the above book list. Let's do the Book of Whir. Let's make Ursula write this one. Chapter, Ursula. We've added a chapter by UK to the book called The Book of Whir, called it Ursula and everything too. Nice. And we can see that like we added this chapter with this book ID, title, and author ID, and the title, book ID, and author ID were set accordingly. So in this kind of a flow, there's like different ways to go about doing this. If I'm used to setting like objects as things, if I want to use my association, one thing I could do here is instead of just saying book ID, and instead of just saying author ID, we could just set a book and an author, right? I could say book dot find gets chomp to I. And I can call this pretty confidently because I don't think that a user is gonna, at least in the happy path, they're not gonna type in an ID that they don't see on the screen. I'd have to add some conditional logic to guide them in the right direction if they typed an ID that couldn't find a book. But in this case, I could also say author equals author.find, whatever ID the user chose. And then down here, when we go to create our chapter, I could say either book ID is book.id or author ID is author.id, calling the IDs on the full objects now. And I think that would still work. We could test that out after that refactor. Let's say exit and get out, hop back in. I'm gonna need to clear my screen in between stuff too. This is like, it's too much stuff on the screen every time. Wanna see some books? No, I wanna make a chapter. We'll do English and Dakota Service Book, 45. We'll have Ron Burgundy write it. Name the chapter. Here we go, many leather-bound books such as this one and everything. Cool. So that would be another way that that code works, right? It still saves and like hooked everything up. The other way that we could do it is simply to say book equals book, author equals author. And that works because on the model, we wrote that a chapter belongs to book and belongs to author, which gives active record setter methods for book and author. Anytime that you're creating an active record object, by the way, these key names are just the names of setter methods that the object's gonna call on itself to set its own attributes under the hood. So you could imagine a chapter's initialize method saying self.title equals whatever this is, self.book equals whatever this is, self.author equals whatever this is. And if I had a typo, it would try to call self.author equals whatever this is, and that's where we'd get an error saying like, we don't have an attribute author on book, because it's smart enough to see that like, that's not exactly what we want to set. In this kind of CLI flow, like also look how like messy this is getting. So if I wanted to like beautify the code that I was doing, there's a couple of choices. Like anytime I print something to the user, if I see that I'm doing it over and over again, I can try to extract that stuff into a method. Right now, the method that I'd really like is like a clear screen method. And there is actually a quick little Ruby trick to clear a screen. Clear terminal screen. And it involves like the printing out of a very special list of characters. We could say system clear. This is the one I learned. I don't know what it means. It's a special like incantation that I think that the \e's and then the bracket H and then the bracket 2J, I believe that \E is like a special way to do an escape character. So normally you'd say like / and then N, and that means like new line character. I think \E bracket H is saying like special kind of escape thing here, and this is the argument that starts with a curly brace that never closes. And here's another argument that starts with a curly brace that never closes. And somehow this syntax tells the terminal window, well, we'll see. Check this out. We'll call clear screen. Because yeah, puts always make something go out to the standard output, right? So like puts basically just like it gets to clear screen and puts the cursor up top. So we call clear screen here, we do welcome to Bookishly, want to see some books, we take the user choice, and then maybe here, like we clear the screen before showing the next thing. Here are your books, puts book.all, right? Cool, you're gonna write a chapter then, great. And then here, I don't know if we'd clear our screen through all of this stuff, but then maybe when they added a new command here, or maybe here, we would, I don't know, let's try this. Let's try clearing the screen here. Which, by the way, might be a problem. I'm going to say, yeah, well, we know after putting clear screen, we have please enter a new command. I'll put like exclamation points before this. More to do. Let's try this out. So if we run this, does the screen clear? Yeah. Want to see some books? Yes, I do. There's some books. Ooh, that's weird. I didn't see books. It just says more to do. Let me try again. Yes to see books again. More to do. See how it's flashing? Like it showed the list. If I do it really fast, you can kind of see it sometimes. Yeah. So it's there. What's happening, right, is I don't actually have a way for like the user to just see stuff before the screen clears. So one thing I could do here is like before clearing the screen, I could say like, please press enter to continue. How could I wait until a user hits enter? Gets. Very good. Good idea. Because what does gets do? It asks for user input, and then the user's done with their input when they hit enter. We're used to setting this to a variable. We're used to calling .chomp on it. But the way that gets works, right, is it asks the user, it shows the user a thing, and then you hit enter and it stops showing you the thing. But while it's showing you the thing, it pauses the code. And what I really need is a way to pause the code until the user is ready to move on, so I can totally do a gets here. And if I wanted to like make my intentions clear, I could say pause till user presses enter, right? So now I think we're going to be able to see stuff, exit, and not just see stuff, but like control the next thing. So we say, yes, see some books. There they are. Please press enter to continue. I press enter. More to do. Please enter a new command. Now I've like shimmed in before a chance to like clear the screen with that gets, and now that we have a little more control. So I say no. That clears our screen. There's way too many books here. So it doesn't even say I'm going to write a chapter. Also, like, we have to clean this up too. But yeah, let's say that we're going to write a chapter in Don't Open This Book. Ooh, edgy. Don't you know I'm just going to open that book? There's a monster at the end of this book. Yeah. Yes. And then there's also, I think there's another monster at the end of this book or something like that. And then he like meets Elmo or something. Because the first one, the monster is just him, because that's the joke, is like Grover's a monster. It's very cool. Anyways, so that's some CLI things. But I also want to get that the SQL stuff, right? Like, does anybody know where the SQL stuff comes from? Like those SQL outputs?
No, I don't.
Cool. So in here, in our rake file, here's a clue. When we run rake console, this line is calling to active record base, and it's calling on this object called .logger, and it's setting it to logger.new. It's not really an object that it's calling on, it's really more of a config setting. So active record base has all of these different things that you can start it up with, and one thing you can start it up with is a logger, which will spit out any database queries that are being run out to the terminal. By default, we have this logger class that we call logger.new. We pass in standard out. By the way, this is where the S input stands for, is this term, because they're going to the same place. They go out to the terminal where the user gets to look. So all I need to do, if I want to have no output, is go into my runner and bring in that same line. But now, instead of setting it to a logger.new, I just don't want a logger. So what's a good value for if I don't want something there? No. Let's try this out. Bin run. I do want to see books. Now we go and look at our seeing books. And notice, no more SQL, right? Like, the SQL query is gone. Any kind of debugging stuff, like I might still keep that in the rake file and such, but now for the user, we hit enter to continue. We want to select a chapter, 44-2, YOLO. There we go. And now after creating the chapter, like it tells me the feedback, but I'm no longer showing the user the implementation of how that happened. I'm just showing them the interface, which confirms all of the selections that they made. Ooh, family caregiver organizer. What other questions do we have about active record, associations, migrations, CLI stuff?
Are there any other kind of relationships we might deal with other than has many belongs to?
There is one third kind. Consider that we have a room which belongs to a hotel, which belongs to a hotel chain, right? Therefore, each room technically belongs to a hotel chain through a hotel, right? A room at a Hilton will never be anything other than a Hilton Hotel's room because that Hilton is a Hilton Hotel's hotel, right? I can't say room belongs to hotel and then say belongs to hotel chain through hotel because belongs to is not set up like has many. Has many takes through as an argument and lets you like piggyback on other associations. Belongs to, the way that belongs to is shaped is about saying this has a foreign key that points to something else. So there's not really room for a through there, right? Active record gives us has one for that purpose. If you have a belongs to through that you need to express in those terms, what you want to say is has one through. That's the only time I think that I'm getting outside of belongs to and has many though. When I need to go through a belongs to association to get to another belongs to association, then I'm saying belongs or has one through. But only because active record doesn't let me say belongs to through.
Oh, so in that case, you would say the room has one through relationship with the hotel, and then the hotel has one through relationship with the chain?
No, the hotel chain would have many hotels, and it would still have many rooms through hotels. Like that works because you can say has many through. So hotel has many, chain has many hotels. Chain has many rooms through hotels would be valid. But if I say room belongs to hotel, then I'd have to say room has one chain through hotel. That's the difference. Is I can say has many through, but I can't say belongs to through. Basically, it comes up as you're writing, and a lot of the time, like if you're doing typical joins with like many to manys, and you don't have a whole lot of like nesting through different kind of architectures in your model domain, you don't run into this a lot. Because it's like a nesting doll shaped thing where this has this and that has this, where this belongs to this and belongs to this. Another example might be that a dog, right, has a veterinarian who works at a given practice. A vet belongs to a practice, a dog belongs to a vet. A dog doesn't belong to a practice through a vet, it has one practice through the vet. And a lot of times you'll see has one and belongs to used almost interchangeably, which kind of makes sense, right? Child has a parent ID. You'd say that child has one parent. You could also say the child belongs to that parent, right? Oh, you got lost. Oh, who do you belong to, little one? Versus like, oh, what's your, what parent do you have? Like that's the same kind of syntax, right? It works both ways. Good question. You'll also see has and belongs to many in some code. And sometimes people will write it like this, has and, yeah, there it is. So there is a has and belongs to many association. And if I say assembly has and belongs to many pets or parts, and a part has and belongs to many assemblies, it lets you create a direct many-to-many connection with another model without any sort of intervening model. So if you didn't want to like have a join model where that belonged to both assemblies and parts explicitly, but you just wanted to deal with assembly and part as models and like just the most boilerplate join, right? This wouldn't work for chapters because chapters have titles. Like the kind of join that we're implying here doesn't have anything other than the two foreign keys. If you're making a more complex join than that, or if your join holds more information than those foreign keys, then you shouldn't be using has and belongs to many. And there's no situation where you'd use this where you couldn't also literally set up the join model and have it work exactly the same way.
Is that what active record creates a table where it's just the combination of the two words?
Yeah. Isn't that fun?
Yeah. And it's just on.
They just create like this ghost, yeah. And you can see how kind of like, how every single word written in this can be derived from words in either of the other tables, right? It's assemblies parts because we're joining assemblies and parts. We have assembly ID because this model is assembly. We have a part ID because this model is part. Part also corresponds with parts the same way that assembly corresponds with assemblies. It's singular versus plural. Active record is basically doing all of this string changing under the hood to figure out what to name things in this table when you say has and belongs to.
Like a column to assemblies parts.
I don't think so. Let's see, corresponding migration might look like. So yeah, let's see. There might be a. They say a corresponding migration might look like this. I'd have to actually run this and see. Like, I think they're just trying to help you visualize. But I bet if you really looked at the logger, you're going to see like a pseudo or a ghost table that like Active Record creates to manage those connections, and that might be kept away from like where we get to touch directly as programmers. Personally, I prefer to just say has many and belongs to and be very explicit about where every single thing is defined because I don't necessarily know enough about how associations are going to change over time, and I hate rewriting code that's like going to work in the same way but just a different style. So I try not to get too locked into one style prematurely. I like styles like that are a little more by hand at the beginning so that I have that freedom to make moves if I need to, where this like kind of takes my hands off the wheel explicitly, and that would make my brain less welcoming of the idea of like, oh yeah, let's talk about that assemblies and parts join in more detail. It's like, no, we've already solved that. It's like, well, are you sure? Sure we don't want to maintain it? It's like, if we have to maintain it, I'm going to have to make a whole join table. I have to think about that stuff. It's like, I'd rather just create a join for a join and like have it be a join, and then I can deal with it as a join. I don't want like my lazy ego to get in the way of good work in the future, basically. Yeah. So much stuff that these can do. Other questions on like CLIs or ways that Active Record can do CRUD stuff? I think that like maybe as a practice thing, we could do this. We could say rake console. Just to review one more time, like how CRUD works. And Joe, since you just got here, I'm gonna run through the schema so you know what kind of relationships we've been working with. We've added two tables. We've added the chapter table and the chapters and authors table. We've taken authors off of books from the last time that we messed with this code. If you remember, it's cool if you don't. This is what our schema looks like now. An author has many books that they've contributed to through chapters, and a book has many authors that contributed to it also through chapters. So I was kind of thinking of this as like a short story book where each chapter is written by one person representing like one short story in that collection. And so with this relationship, let's say that I wanted to do some reading, right? Let's say that I wanted to find all the authors that there were. I'd have to call all authors, right? Author.all. We can see some objects. I can see some IDs, right? What if I wanted to find the third author out of the database? I have choices. I could say author.findBy. Find by is a nice one because it gives me any number of conditions I can set, and I can even set multiple conditions in here. So I could say ID is 3, right? And that finds Lao Tzu. But if I say ID is 3 and name is Richard Robert, people call him Ricky Bobby, but this is nil, right? Because there is no author where the ID is 3 and the name is Richard Robert, right? Only where all conditions are met does the record get found, and it returns nil otherwise. If we do record find or author find by ID 3, that gives us the author. What if I changed find by to a where? What's the difference in the output? It's similar to some other stuff from this mod when we were doing enumerables. The difference between find or find by and where, that's it. It's the same as the difference between like find and find all or find and select in our like standard Ruby. So if I say author where ID 3, still get loud Sue back, but notice now it's sitting in an array, right? If we made another author that had the same name, which I think we can, because there's no uniqueness validation. Let me try this. Author.create. If I call .create, it's the same as calling .new and then .save. So I'm going to do that order first. I'll say name is loud Sue. And if I want to save it, I call .save. That would be exactly the same as if I called in one step author.create. We have 3 loud Sues in the database, right? So now if I say author.where name is loud Sue, we get all of our loud Sues back. But if we change this to say author.find, and it doesn't like this because I said find. Find is the one that just wants an ID. Find is the short one that just takes the simple standard way that people look stuff up. Find by is the one that's a slightly more configurable tool. So if where gave me 3, find by finds the first match, just gives me that first one. Important to think about the difference between the two because sometimes you want a collection and sometimes you just want one thing. I feel like between find by, and where, like that kind of covers a lot of the lookup stuff that we need to do. Another interesting piece is that active record where syntax has something called arrow, which is, let's see if I can find some code example here. Arrow, 1, 2, 3, to SQL. There's this syntax we can play with where like in the where, let me try it like this. I think I can say author.where, and then I can pass in just a string that would be like that part of a SQL query. So I think I can say name equals loud Sue, right? And that gives me an author election. See where name equals loud Sue. No, that's not it. Hang on. Active record where raw SQL. Rails raw SQL example. That's what I want to do. Connection execute. Select all. No. I'm trying to remember where. Oh yeah, we could say active record base connection execute. Similar to what we did before when we said like DB execute. That's not really what I'm thinking about though. I want to say active record where. Oh, this is what I want to say. I want where, but I can pass in a SQL string. Because you know how SQL has that like keyword? Let's check on where. Rewhere? No, I don't want rewhere. Cache conditions. Firing group, receiving single, take first, la-di-da, last nil. Client.first name equals. Maybe not. I'm trying to remember where I found it in these docs, because this is the first place that I found them. But there's just a lot of wheres. Oh, there we go. I think I had to just have a string on the other side of my equal sign. I think that I had a double quoted equal sign, or a double quoted string, but I didn't say on the right hand side of the equal that it was literally a string. So let's try this again. Where name equals and then single quotes loud Sue. There's ours. Yeah, so this is nice. This is powerful because it lets me go in and actually do stuff like this, right? You know how like SQL doesn't care about cases? That can be a helpful tool sometimes when we want to do a lookup, right? The user doesn't remember to capitalize something. If I want to do a case-insensitive search based on what a user gave me, I could try that. I think that this even works with like a find by. Yeah, and then it just gives me the first one. So yeah, I can put in key values, or I can put in like SQL queried bits.
I forget this like it only uses capitalization.
Yeah, that's it. It just becomes case insensitive. Yeah. So other stuff that I guess that we had talked about was this clear screen thing in the CLI, setting the base logger to nil, which can be like a helpful thing to get the SQL queries off of your output. But yeah, when we created this clear screen method and called it at various places in our code, it allows our screen to get cleared up, which makes things look really nice. it's all helpful stuff. What other questions do we have? Anything else? Joe.
So, appreciate it. This may be one for offline, but under the command line, I wanted to have menu options and use if and else if. So the person would enter a number, I can either put and return a string of whatever the case may be, that number, and then of course it would change it. So essentially, I'm trying to put together how to do that via command line with key chunks and maybe some interpolation.
Sure. So I think that we have to remember that puts is how I talk to the user, and then gets chomp is how I'm going to listen to the user. So let's talk about it. Right now, I've got an app, and this is how my app currently runs. Welcome to Bookishly. Do I want to see books, right? Please select yes, Y, or no, N, right? If I type yes, it's going to show me some books, like a lot of them, right? It shows them to me. Here are our books, etc. Please press enter to continue. Cool, so I do that, and then it asks again, do I want to see books or do I want to do something else? I say no, and it takes me through a whole different feature. Please type an ID from the above book list, it says at the bottom here. And so it's going to ask the user for an ID. I'm going to put in, I don't know, the Sunbonnet Babies book. That sounds great. That was my nickname in high school. Called me Sunbonnet Baby. We'll try Stephen King. Hello, world. Then that tells me that I've added the chapter. So Joe, like all of that stuff that just happened is taking place in here. So the first thing I do is I empty the screen out. Then I print out the welcome message, and then I print out the prompt and tell the user what to expect. On the next line, I decide what I'm about to get from the user in response, right? So I could name this probably more specifically than what I have, but I think the general term user choice is at least close enough to get moving with it. So I just say user choice is whatever the gets chomp is from here. And it's kind of my job to name these variables according to how I want to use them. Right now it's my top level menu choice. The way that I manage to keep doing things over and over until the user types exit is I put everything inside of a while loop that's based on the user choice not being exit. So if the user had first typed exit, we won't even hit this loop. We'll just go after the loop and say goodbye, right? This loop, at the very end of it, we ask for the next value of user choice. So this is where that more to do thing comes in every time and asks for a YN again. Right at the end of the while loop, before we're about to go to the top, we give the user the chance to change from a non-exit user choice to potentially change to an exit user choice. If they type exit here, it's going to go up to the top of the loop, but then immediately the loop would be canceled and it would take us out. So that's kind of how the loop piece of it works. Within this, I have conditionals based on the value of user choice. So as long as they're not exiting, if the user choice is yes, or the user choice is Y, then we're going to just do a simple listing of all the books. And if not, then we're going to do this other feature of adding a new chapter. So if I wanted to really break this out and add more options, right? Maybe I want to say, like, instead of saying want to see some books, maybe I say, what do you want to do? And then I say, please select a number from below. Right? And anytime press exit to quit. And then now it's my job to like give options. So I could say puts 1, view all books. And then I just want to kind of follow this pattern. Puts 2, create a new chapter. Then we'll maybe say 3. Edit existing chapter, which we haven't even done yet. So view all books, create new chapter, edit existing chapter. That means that if I want to do the view all books thing now, let me actually say book.all. I'm not going to limit it, whatever. We're just going to say if the user choice was 1. Any gets chomp value is a string, by the way. So even though they just wrote the number 1, it's going to get picked up and parsed as a string. So if the user choice is 1, we're doing this. Now I can say else if user choice equals 2. And we're going to do all of this like chapter creation stuff. And then I could put in another case for our else if user choice being 3 right here. We could just say here puts to do, oops, implement chapter edit story. Something like that, right? So I haven't really figured out what to do in that story yet, but I just want to see if 1, 2, and 3 work. So I'm setting one user choice based on a menu that I've shown a user, and then depending on what they select, I'm going to do some other stuff. I just want to see if this kind of works, and then we can talk refactoring for a second. So if I hit 2 to create a new chapter, here we are. Please type in an ID from the list. It does say, cool, you're gonna write a chapter then. I do think that I need to change like how my output is working to like make it clearer to the user. So maybe I'll do the listing of books and then afterwards I might say, cool, you're gonna write a chapter. But in any case, it wants to see an ID from above. Let's add a chapter to this Grapes of Wrath. And let's make it be by Ursula. And we'll call it Lathes of Wrath. That's good. That's a literary pun. All right. Cool. So we've added our chapter by Ursula into the Grapes of Wrath book, and then that change has been made. It's cool. So the options are working right now. Look how hard this runner file is to read right now, right? Like I've got some stuff that's just about like showing things to the screen here. I've got in here, like if the user choice is 1, I have very simple stuff to do, and then immediately there's user choice 2, and then there's all this stuff. If I wasn't like familiar with this code, I'd kind of feel like just based on how all of this stuff is weighted, that like most of this app is about creating a chapter. But I don't actually think that most of this app is about creating a chapter. At least this file, I think, is mostly about controlling the overall user flow through the whole app. So this is where I might like write methods, right? Am I missing, am I late for a, oh, our meeting is at 4, not at 3:30, right? I think there's a stand-up or a big like all hands thing or something going on at 4. I'm not sure though, but here. So this big chunk of option 2, right? This is like all these things to create. What if I like moved this? Like I just command X and I make a method call instead, right? So I say like handle chapter creation, right? And then I put it up in a method up here like I did with clear screen. Def handle chapter creation. And I put all this stuff in here. Now this is getting a little nicer. The downside now is that I have to go halfway down my file before I even see like what this runner is about. But let me just make sure that the chapter creation kicks off the way that it did before. We go in, we hit 2. Great, we're creating a chapter. Did it. Cool, that works. Still, that's my kind of test as I go to refactor. Oh, exit. There we go. So let's talk about maybe this option. In my bin, I could say new file here, and I could say like CLI methods.rb. Just make a place for them. And I could go into runner here. I could require relative CLI methods. Relatis. Cool. And then I could move these methods, clear screen, and handle chapter creation into like this other file. And here I'm kind of separating like the job of what is my overall playbook that I'm trying to run here in this application from the job of how do I define how to run either of these plays, right? If I'm watching a basketball game, I don't see a coach go like, hey, let's do a high post pick and roll and then somebody else cut on the baseline and be mindful of like that 45 angle 3 that nobody's supposed to. The coach would say like run 2, right? They just throw a number up and then everybody kind of moves the way that they know they're supposed to move. I've already told everybody how they're supposed to move in here. I'd much rather have the run file just tell me like which routine we're gonna run. So this would be a really simple one, right? Like we could call this like a list all books. We could put one in here called list all books. Bring this back. And this is like my control, like do things still work? We hit 2, create a chapter, 44, 4, nice, That works. We hit enter. We go to, oh yeah, not YN. I have to change that last line, right? Probably return the menu. I don't know. That's a lot. I feel like this is like me repeating myself, and we should clean that up next. But yeah, listing all books, that works as well. So this more to-do line, let's talk about that real quick. This is all working. We've moved methods out into this CLI methods file. Now our runner file is like getting smaller and smaller to the point that we might even be able to just see it on one screen, like a really tight, terse description of, this is the outline of all the ways that people can interact in the app. I think that this is like a menu, right? I could say def display main options. And instead of doing these putses, at the top here I could say display main options. Maybe instead of user choice, I connect this variable with the options that I've just displayed. So I take all my instances, wow, can I select text? There we go. I take all my instances of user choice and I change them to user option. Right? Because now it's pretty clear that like we display main options and this is the user option that was selected. At least it's clearer than saying option than pivoting to choice. So I just renamed it to kind of keep it mentally in the same realm. Then, okay, while user options not exit, we clear the screen, and then depending on the option, we either list books, handle creation. Here we could like have an edit method. Down here we have this like press enter to continue, and then gets clear screen. I think that this itself could be like a method call, like that we could break up as well. We could say here like hold for enter press, or maybe pause. Maybe not for, but until. Sure. And then in here we'll make a method called pause until enter press. Yeah, I know. So that moves that over. I like that. Bring that back. Let's see. Now this menu piece here, right? We have this menu method, display main options. I kind of think what we could do is move that over here as well, because that is CLI method, not really an instruction of driver code. So we clear our screen, we puts the welcome, we display our options, we take an option. While the option is not exit, we always clear the screen before whatever we do. Whatever we do is defined by the user option that was chosen. Then after that, we wait until a user hits enter. And then here, how about we just display the main options again, right? Let's just reuse that same code. This should work about the same way as it always has. Yeah, view all books, 1, great. Press enter to continue, we did that. What do you want to do? And now we're back to the main menu again, kind of seamlessly. And that's by like realizing what we were doing in 2 different parts of the code was kind of the same thing. And once we've broken things up into methods, it's easy to just plug in those methods where we recognize we want to do that kind of work a second time. That I think is the real reason why we talk about refactoring things into methods. Because when you have a method that you know what it does, it's kind of easier to think about reusing or refactoring that as opposed to having like 8 lines of code sitting out in a file and you're worried about, I know those lines of code have to be right there and they have to do exactly that, and I don't want to like have to think about all of the surrounding code when I want to go make changes. So by walling them off into a method, I don't know, I feel like that's an easier unit to play around with. In any case, edit existing, puts to do, yep. We'll exit. So yeah, in terms of the back and forth to the user, Joe, I think that's what I'm kind of going after is it starts with showing the user something and then taking some feedback from the user. And we went into this in a little more detail a little bit ago when we talked about creating a chapter. So when we created a chapter, we first had to go into our models and we made a 2S method. The way that puts book.all works is it gets a whole collection of book instances and then calls puts on each of them. When you call puts on an array, it puts each thing in the array. So 2S is what method actually gets called on the object when you call puts. Therefore, if I have a 2S method on book that knows how to display the ID and title, and a 2S method on author that knows how to display an ID and a name, then when I say puts book.all, that's what gives me this mega list of books when it's time to create a new chapter. ID colon name of the books, right, for each one. That's the 2S method running on books. Then when I select one of these, it says, please type an ID from the above book list. It's asking for it right here. I'm going to also move this over. Also, my indentation is booty, and I don't like it. Now this is, we can be a little bit less strident because the user has affirmatively chosen that they were going to do a chapter. Cool. So we have puts.book.all. Please type an ID from the above list. Maybe I do another puts, just some like spacing here. In any case, we've done, we've got this piece, right, where we're asking for the chapter or for the book ID. So we might put in 60, yeah, sure. Verifying dates with the Christian era. That kind of sounds like there's a boy band that plays at like churches and you're trying to like make sure that you book them correctly. Like, we are the Christian era. I don't know. Anyways, just hitting b-boy stances. Okay, so now we're getting invited to type an ID from the above author list, right? And as a user, I see this list of IDs here next to names. I can spot the name. I can map it to an ID. I can give the person what they want, right? Perhaps I've only shown somebody a list of names and I want the user to type a name and I'm going to do like find by name, right? That would work too. Eventually these IDs are used to call book.find, right? And to call author.find, right? If I wanted to refactor this though, if I wanted to say please type a name from the above author list, please pay attention to detail as you type. Just trying to warn a user that I'm not going to get this right if they're close but not on it. And so now I could say author.findBy name equals whatever the user types in. Does that kind of make sense? It's only going to find the first author where the name matches. So if we refactored it that way, we should still see a list of authors get printed out. We should still see an invitation for input from the user, but then we're asking for a different type of input, and accordingly, we're going to do our finding in a different style. So here, if we exit out, sure, that's fine. Can't find, and here's a problem, by the way. Please type an ID from the above author list. Can't find an author with ID 0. Since I only gave it letters there instead of numbers, it was unable to use .find. This is what happens when you use .find and it fails. The whole app crashes. If I wanted to refactor it to be a little bit gentler, I could change this to a find by. Right? Find by fails a little bit nicer. It just returns a nil if it doesn't find something. It doesn't like break all your code. Cool, let's try this again, creating a chapter, this time with typing an author's name. So now we have all of our book IDs. I like this better, right? Please type an ID from the above book list. Now I'm free to scroll, but I kind of know what my intention is as I start scrolling. That's cool. Let's do Uncle Sam's fact book of the World War. That sounds like the Monday Night Football intros. Right? Like infantrymen. The World War. All right.
World War II.
That's right. Yeah. It was like 1926. Yeah. Yeah, we just finished up with the only world war we're about to have. It's like, dial that back. Oh, man. That'd be funny if somebody come from the future and was like, oh, yeah, y'all setting up for the first canceled election, huh? It's like, wait, first? Like, just hits me twice? Oh, no. Cool. So let's type a name. Let's say UK. Cool. Type that in. Name the chapter. Fingies Cross. Yeah, check it out. It did actually add that author, right? It didn't just copy the string that I gave it, because when it gives the feedback at the end, it literally calls c.author.name. So through all of this, we grabbed a book, we grabbed an author object, and then we ended up creating a chapter by associating it with a book and an author that chapter belongs to. And once we created that chapter, we're just asking that chapter, what's your author's name? What's your book's title? What's your chapter's title? So all of the stuff that prints out at the end is a way for us to confirm that we've actually saved something to the database. If this didn't work, like what if somebody forgot about capitalization? So we go back through the loop, create a new chapter. Let's do 49 again. Let's try to like make another chapter by UK, but I do lowercase. When I say 5, why? Who knows? Why did I write 5? Great. But then we have a problem. Undefined method name for nil class. Why? Because we started trying to call c.author.name, but there is no c.author value because c.author got set here based on the value of this variable, and this variable was set here based on what the user typed. But since the user was looking for a name that exactly matched, or sorry, the user was looking for a lowercase name, right? And we're searching for an exact name match, we didn't find an author with the find by, right? So if I wanted to add a condition where an author didn't get found, I might say something like if author, or I might say like if there's not an author, right? If bang author means like if there's no author right now. Or we could be more explicit and say if author equals nil, right? If we haven't set one, then maybe here we do this again. Try this one more time. Yeah, we'll do this. If the author is nil, let's ask them again. Let's clear the screen. Let's print out the author list again, and let's invite them to try that again. Please try again. Not found. Please try again. Type a name from the above author list. Please pay close attention to detail as you type, maybe, right? And I try this out. And so now we have two different tries, right? We have up to 2 tries. What happens if they tried wrong too many times? Well, I guess we could put another loop in. Create a chapter, 49, UKL, sure. And that doesn't work. Not found, please try again. And now I absolutely have to get it right. So I say like UK, and that, okay, and then it says finally name your chapter. This is gonna be a problem though. Same thing, right? I didn't find that author the second time. So instead of just having this if case, we could try to flip it. We could say while the author is nil, right? While the author is nil, we're gonna go ahead and go through this whole rigmarole, right? Because at the end of this, we set a value for author. If the author value that we set at the end of the loop is still nil, we're gonna have to go through the loop again. We'll only get out of the loop when we find an actual author. Let's try that out. Oh dear, I exited terminal. Every time. Let's try it again. Bin run. Option dose. 49, UKL, ULK, sure. So now I'm in a loop until I actually get a match. Lao Tzu, finally name your chapter. There we go. Now we've set an author. Hey. Just Lao Tzu just sliding into the book's DMs. All right, cool. So we hit enter to continue. We exit out. Great. Here's another thing we could do based on that syntax we had talked about before where we could put raw SQL in. Maybe we don't need this first one, right? Like maybe the only reason we want this first one is so we have a second not found message, right? I do see a lot of repetition here. So maybe I leave the repetition because I've only said something twice and it does seem like it's for 2 different reasons. There's like the first prompt, which is nice, and the second prompt, which is kind. The difference between niceness and kindness, right, is somebody going like, hey, you fucked up. Like, that's kind. A nice friend won't tell you that, but like a kind friend will. We're trying to be a kind friend the second time. So I don't think I actually need to dry that out. One thing I would like to do is make this search condition a lot easier for people. So instead of saying name gets chomp, and Joe, you were talking about interpolation. Here's a pretty good example of interpolation. Instead of saying name gets chomp as the condition of this find by, I can also pass in a raw string. Oops. And so I could say name equals, and then I can say whatever the value of the name is in like a single quote character, or a single quote string within the string. Do I have 2 there? Yeah, name equals, and then something goes in here. So if I said like UK again, that would work. If I said name like, now I'm doing the SQL case insensitive thing, right? But I'm not always gonna be looking for UK. Sometimes I'm gonna be looking for other stuff. Since I'm in a double quote string, I am allowed to interpolate here. So whatever value is gonna be filled in as like the target here, I can use the hashtag curly brace and take in the value of gets chomp. And now it's starting to get a little expressive, right? Because like now somebody doesn't have to like care about case sensitivity to find their author for the thing they're trying to create. So
It's a big problem that you're interpolating
I don't think so, because I'm not really interpolating in single quotes here. Overall, I'm putting single quotes into a 2-quote string. This is where I'm really interpolating into is the overall string. The single quote characters are just considered part of the overall string. We're not like nesting a string in the string there. Great question though. If I was just doing a single quote string, the interpolation absolutely would not work. It would literally print out every character I typed there instead of trying to evaluate the Ruby version of gits.chomp. So if we get in here, we're looking for an author and I don't want it to be case sensitive now. So I have my book ID. We'll do, don't open this book again, sure. And then I want to do sking, but I say like s.king, all lowercase. And check it out, that doesn't give me the no author found thing because I used like the SQL like keyword and that kind of put pieces together. So yeah, can name it, yay. Did it. And I think the only other thing I'd mention is that as you do a lot of testing in your code like this, you end up with extra shit, right? Like we have all these extra like Lao Tzus. Why did I just say rake? I meant to say rake console. I don't want the extra Lao Tzus in my database anymore. So like as I go through, eventually I call like author.all, and I like kind of scan through this, and I'm like, ooh, you know what? I don't want 5 or 6. So how do I like delete author 5? Could I call like author.delete 5? It did do a destroy. Let's see, author.all. Do we have author 5? We don't, so delete works. We also do have destroy. There is. Destroy fires callbacks too. Delete just like deletes that one record. Remember when I said before, like if I delete a book, I want to delete all the chapters of that book? That's called dependent destroy. You can add onto an association syntax kind of like this. From the perspective, let's say from the perspective of an author, has many chapters, dependent destroy, true. Since the chapter is the dependent of the author, it depends on the existence of a foreign key author ID to live and be its true self. Every time that an author gets deleted, any chapter that points to that author's ID would also be deleted, but only if we fire destroy. If you call delete, it's going to try to just take care of the thing itself, but destroy tries to do all of the kind of cascading dependent destructions as well. So destroy is a slightly stronger word that's hooked into how Active Record knows about associations, and if you've configured the associations to delete themselves when their parents are deleted, with syntax like this on the parent, then using destroy will have a different impact than delete in those cases. But yeah, that's deletion, by the way. Did you know that you could do delete like on a class scope like that? Just pass in like the ID of something that you wanted to delete. I think people are like Ron Burgundy, like let's try an instance delete for Ron Burgundy because he has many leather-bound books. He doesn't write many leather-bound books. We'll say author.fourth. I love the fact that we have .fourth. I love it so much. If I say author.fourth.destroy, then it does delete from authors where the ID is 4. And commits that transaction, and now that author is gone from my collection. So yeah, we've talked about database, we've talked about putting things in the database, we've done a little bit of stuff in the console about updating existing things in the database. I think that this is a good pattern to be in, by the way, when I do creation. The pattern I'm talking about is not just getting IDs from the user, but using the ID or using the name to actually find the resource at that moment. And I say this is useful because you might not need to do this, like to create your stuff. Like you might not need to find a book by the ID if all you're trying to do is set that book's ID once again. Like if all I was trying to say is book ID equals book.id, then why did I go through the trouble of getting a user's ID value, searching a book by it, and then getting that book just to call .id and get that first ID back? Right? What would be the point of that? Well, the main point of it, I think, is just for us to practice taking user input and finding an object like this from the user input that already exists. Because when we do any editing of resources, that's exactly the move, right? Showing a user a list of things they could edit, taking a selection, using that selection to look up the editable item from the database, and then executing the edit. Here's kind of what I mean. Last thing, because I still haven't been kicked out of the room, but I feel like I'm on borrowed time. I'm going to say handle chapter edit. And here's a fun thing. Remember in CLI methods when we made our chapter and at the end we did this thing, c.author.name to the book, called it c.title. I'm going to borrow like a chunk of this string for later. I'm going to say handle chapter edit. I'm going to make a method called handle chapter edit. Def handle chapter edit. Notice how now that I've moved some stuff into CLI methods, the natural way to use my runner file seems to be declare the thing I want to do, write a method for it, like figure out how it fits in. I might not start by writing a method in CLI methods, but I want to now, and I think that's an improvement in my run file. If I also wanted to, I could just write all the stuff I need to right in the runner, and then I could refactor it out into a separate file when that was good. I'm just pretty confident because I've done this kind of thing before, so I don't mind just starting with the method where I think it's going to end up belonging. But to handle a chapter edit, we're just going to edit like the title of an existing chapter. I don't need the user to look up books or authors for that. The chapter to be edited is already in the database, so we could display all the chapters that there are to be edited, right? We could also do a search based on like what authors chapters, but that would be a multi-step. We'd have to show authors, select an author, author.chapters, show the user those chapters, and let them pick a chapter from there to edit. Right now I'm going to skip the author.chapters step and just say chapter.all. And so that's what we'll do. Chapter.all puts, and I'll say right after I do that, another little line, and then puts, please enter the ID of the chapter you wish to edit. And then we could say chapter ID equals what? Gets.chomp. That's where we're listening to the user. Cool. So at this point, chapter ID is gets.chomp. We should be able to find a chapter by that ID. Knowing what I know now about find, I feel like find by is like the gentler way to move through things. Although, I don't know, sometimes you really do want to see the error instead of going too far in the process and then realizing, oh, there wasn't an author back there. So it's kind of like pros and cons to each. In this case, I'll say ID is whatever chapter ID is. I suppose that's going to be a number, isn't it? I should say 2i just to be sure. Chapter.all, we're going to select one of these, we're going to call this the chapter, right? And then at this point, we might want to say like puts chapter after another break. Maybe we do a clear screen here. Then we display the chapter and then ask the user, please give this chapter a new title. And then we'll do new title as gets chomp. And once the user's given us a new chapter, I think that's where we could say like chapter.assign attributes. Title of the chapter is going to be whatever the user just displayed and the gets chomp. And then we can call chapter.save to get it into the database. We could have also called chapter.update. Same thing as these two lines together. I'm just trying to like illustrate this in practice. So once if we've done this and we've saved the chapter, then I think that we should probably display the user the new updated chapter. Puts updated. Maybe clear the screen in between. New chapter info is, and then we puts the chapter one more time. And then we'd go back to our regular menu flow. So let's try it out. We go to the console. Oh no. Well, that was a rate console that didn't work. Oh, dependent destroy, it didn't like that. Probably because I didn't look at the actual syntax and I've messed up some piece of that. That's fine. I'm not really as concerned about that. I really just wanted to run my runner anyhow. I was gonna command K, but then my code did it for me. Added existing chapter, so we hit 3. Ah, shoot. Enter the ID of the chapter you wish to edit. Okay, this is something I did on book and author, but I can't just say, you can't just say puts chapter.all, right? Like that just doesn't work by itself. There's a way that works. This is kind of underscoring that. Chapter.all is an array of chapter instances. If you puts chapter.all, it calls puts on each of those instances. That's why you see a new line after each instance. Yes. So when you say puts things.all, right? So this is another way to say call puts on every chapter in chapter.all. So if I create an instance method that puts will call under the hood, which would be 2s, right? Because puts prints the 2s version of something. And in short, I want to go into the chapter model, write a 2s method so that puts chapter.all actually prints out the information from each chapter that I want. So for one chapter to express itself as a string, I think that's where I'd want to have this piece. We could say here that maybe the c.title goes first.
Would that bother if you used like 2s somewhere else? Like on I don't know.
It's not going to overwrite like string, or it's not going to overwrite like how integer calls 2s. It's just 2s as it's defined on this chapter class that changes. Every class in Ruby gets a 2s method by default. So when we make a custom class and we want to overwrite that, we can do that without affecting any of the other existing or custom classes. So I'm going to say written by author name in the book called, book title, and then maybe I'll have like some other stuff above and below it. This string is weird syntax right now, and I don't like it at all. You shouldn't do a multi-line string like this. What we want to have is like a Ruby here doc where we'd have something like this instead. At the top, we'd say arrow, arrow, dash, and then some term. So I might say here chapter display. You can name this whatever you want. Whatever name you choose at the top of a multi-line string, you just repeat it when you're done, and it closes the multi-line string up. See how the end color changes when I get the Y in there versus when it's not there? It thinks it's still part of a multi-line string now. Now it knows that the multi-line string is closed. Because of that, I don't need literal quote characters anywhere in here. This is going to just be what the output looks like, and I can still interpolate with Ruby like I would with any other double quote string. So now when we look at all of our chapters, blah, 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 it's gonna break, that's fine. Cool, let's edit an existing chapter. Oh no, undefined local variable or method C. Sure, what do I want here instead of C? Out there I had a variable called C, right? I was calling c.title, c. Also like, what the hell kind of a variable name is C? Handle chapter creation? Ugh, I don't know. Let's call this chapter. Then we'll say here, just write hapter a couple times. It's kind of fun. I've never thought of the word hapter. I wrote a weird thing there. Cool, let's try it again. Edit existing. Oh no, did I find it? I lost another one. Chapter.create. Oh no, it's still in chapter. Yeah, so what's C dot need to change to here? Self, right? It's like I am an instance of chapter. Since I moved this code from the runner file, which is outside of the classes, I could call this .title on some instance of chapter that I had defined in the runner file. But now that I've moved the code into the class definition itself, this code has to work for any given instance of chapter that runs the 2s method. And when we think about what given instance is running this method, that's my hint that I'm thinking about self. I could say self explicitly. I could also rely on self implicitly here. Both of these approaches will work, right? I'm going to say self dot to be extremely explicit in both cases, or all three cases. But let's see how it works now. Open her up, add an existing chapter. Oh no, undefined method title for nil class. Well, let's see. Chapter RB in 10, 2s, undefined method title for nil class. Well, what did we call? Title. Self.title, self.book.title. What if a chapter is not associated with a book? Like what if we have chapters in our database that don't have books on them right now? That would explain why we'd be getting title on nil class on line 10, because that's where we say self.book.title. So what we could do here, this is a tricky one, but we could say self.book, question mark? This is a ternary, right? Do we have a book? If we have a book, let's display the title. Else, the colon is like the else case, we'll display NA. or maybe we'll say TBD, because it's like a chapter that hasn't gone into a book. So this is basically saying, is this condition true or false, question mark. If it's true, let's return this. If it's not, that's the colon is the else case, then we'll return this. I think we're going to need the same kind of shape situation for self.author, because it's possible a chapter was saved without an author. This, by the way, might not be the way I'd solve this in my app. I might also solve this in my app by just going to the database and manually making sure that any incomplete chapters that I had built while I was debugging just either got deleted or had all those fields filled in. But I can also be conditionally aware. Do we have an author? If we do, how about you put the name of the author there? If we don't, let's not call name on nil. Let's say anonymous, right? Sure. And maybe we'll put that in parentheses too, just to denote that like these are values that maybe are placeholders. Let's try again. Oh, it's because I'm scrolled. It's because I'm zoomed in so much here that like I can't really show a whole line because I'm trying to optimize for readability, and this gutter doesn't go over to the left, and I don't want to lose this stuff either because like, yeah. In any case, yeah. So we'll edit existing. There we go. Please enter the ID of the chapter you wish to edit. Oh no, I forgot to display IDs. But hey, we do have chapters. That's kind of cool. A lot of them. All the chapters that we've made so far are here. So now I don't have an ID. I'm going to assume chapter 1 exists still. I don't know. Yeah, there it is. So I entered 1. It found a chapter with ID 1. New beginnings. Newer beginnings. Wow. If you see those characters show up when you try to hit arrows, that usually means that like there's something called Ruby read line that needs to be updated. Sometimes it's your actual bash that needs to be updated, like brew update bash or brew update ZSH. In any case, here's my new title. Updated, new chapter info. Yeah. Enter to continue. We're back to the main menu. And that's like, here, let's get this ID back. Chapter ID. This will just be self.id. Run that back. Exit out, come back in. We want to edit an existing chapter. Now we can see IDs. I've decided that Lao Tzu did not actually write in the World War Factbook. Interesting article I read on Lao Tzu too, that like, not even really about war that much. Mostly about like preventing war and building consensuses and recognizing that most wars are not winnable when you look at the opening conditions. Like, but yeah, it's still very much read by people who wage war, of course, because like sometimes you have to. But I think most of the point he was trying to make is like most of the time you actually don't have to. Most people who lose didn't have to. Yeah, yeah. Depends on I don't know. I don't know shit about war. New chapter info is cool. So we did change hey to hello here. That edit like ran through successfully. And it all started, I think, here in the runner with like some kind of shape of things. Like once I got things into a while loop and I knew that at the end of the loop I could display my options and take the next option. At the very end I have like a goodbye. At the very beginning I have a hello and getting my first option. But look how like terse this is. Like even on my giant screen, I can still make technically every line that's responsible for running my actual app in my runner. Like they're all there. I can totally tell you the story of this app at a high level just by looking at this file now that I've refactored some things over into CLI methods. Will it always benefit me to refactor things over into another file? Maybe not. Maybe I decide that clear screen is something that I want to have defined right here. Maybe I want to have display main options defined right here, because those are two things that I call multiple times. Like I call clear screen twice, I call display main options twice. That feels like this file is reliant on working with those a little bit more than some of the other methods. So maybe I put those methods, which are really more about meta like runner stuff and less about model creation stuff. Maybe I leave runner type methods in the runner and other CLI methods that deal with more model work. I put those in another file. That's an organizational choice. Yeah.
I was wondering just about that, what you're saying the other. It's like, is there a convention that's more like, you have a methods file or putting the methods on the...
Whenever possible, so if I look at some of these methods and I ask myself, like, which of these could actually live on a model? I'll tell you what, this right here, you could probably put on the class book, right? We could say book.listAll, and that would do the same thing here. As a matter of fact, let's try that. Book dot list all. Then we can go to the book class. Where'd you go, book class? There you are. So if I'm calling it on the class, that means the method name needs to start with self. Self dot list all. And that could be all the stuff from here. Make sure that like my nothing up my sleeves move when I comment out code that I expect not to run. Let's try it again. Exit. Ooh, exeot. It evolves from exe and exeoto. All right. Ruby bin run. View all books. Yeah, so my viewing all books works the same like as the class method call. So since that method was just about displaying things on a book, I felt like it was very safe to put that into the books class. I might not feel the same way about these others, like pause until enter press. This seems much more to do with the process of running the CLI than any model work. This one here, that's about chapter creation, I kind of feel like you could put pieces of this maybe inside of the chapter class. I also feel like there's pieces of this though about like displaying books, displaying authors that you could put in the book and the author classes. But I kind of think that because this feature is a big deal that requires me to show stuff from one thing, show stuff from another thing, get some input, and then do something with a third type of thing based on that input, I think that if I broke this up and moved it to other classes, I might actually be making it harder for somebody to read and maintain the code, because just to figure out how one chapter got created, they'd have to hop over to the book class to figure out how this stuff worked. Then they'd have to hop over to the author class to figure out how this stuff worked. We'd also be putting a lot of like put statements in the middle of like model code, which kind of feels like we're muddying the waters between am I a model that knows data versus am I an interface that prints things out to a user. And so if I start having more of my methods do more and more printing work, like then it becomes unclear why I even have a CLI. Like, oh, it looks like your model's also kind of a view. Like your model gives the user places to give responses. And anyways, I would rather have this whole method tell me the overall story in one place rather than have to like disperse my attention across 3 different files to figure out how that one method works. I think that's distinct from this runner. I'm okay to disperse my attention across multiple files to figure out how this runner works, because my goal when I get in here is to figure out how the overall app works. And then I have the ability to zoom in and get really granular on one user story at a time if I choose to.
It's like because of bucket, everything works everywhere as long as it's labeled.
That's right.
Scope.
Yes.
So it's all just like.
Not technically because of bundle, it's really because, that's a good question, it's because in the config. So at the top of runner, we require config environment. Part of what config environment is doing is making sure that all of the gems in our gem file are required. Config environment is also making sure that we know where our database is and how to hook up to it. And finally, it makes sure that any models that are stored in this lib folder are going to be included. If I added another folder, like just for my CLI stuff, and I had various Ruby files, I could also say like require all some CLI folder name, right? And I've seen on a couple of projects, like people have found new files that aren't really model or class files, but they're helping them do work and they're trying to figure out where those files go and how to make sure the whole app knows. Whatever folder that you put it in, if it's not lib, you might need to tell your config environment to require it. But yeah, if you're also running into that, you can ask anytime, we can help out. This has been fun. Any other questions for now?
Could you guys just give like having trouble understanding how like the schemas work and migration and all of that?
Good question, yeah. So this, let's first of all, I want to talk about gemfile lock. Gemfile lock is different from gemfile. Gemfile here is like a recipe for how I'd like to go and install some gems. Gemfile lock is like the culinary review of the cooked recipe, right? I went and got those gems, and not only did I get your active record stuff, I got these specific versions of all the gems that active record depends on. Not only did I get pry stuff, but I got something else that maybe pry needs, which I think is thread safe, if I remember right. But all these different gems are, pry uses code ray and method source. So all I needed to say was gem-pry, but in the process of getting gem-pry from rubygems.org, it pointed the bundler to those gems that pry depends on, and now the gem file lock is holding on to all that. So you could call this a manifest file, right? Kind of like when you get a package and it has like a label on the side and it says like, here's everything we put in the box. And how does a manifest file get created? People like put things in the box and they check things off the manifest, and then everything's in the box and everything's on the manifest, right? If I change what's on the manifest, it doesn't change what's in the box, right? If I get something from DHL and it's like, you got 2 sweatshirts and a hat, and then I like cross out hat, that doesn't erase the hat from the box. I've just changed the manifest. This is just a reflection of the gems that have been installed. If I changed things in here, it wouldn't change that. Schema.rb works the same way. Schema.rb, this file is actually dumped out by Active Record every time it runs the latest version of a given migration or does a rollback. So when you roll a database backwards or forwards, Active Record goes, hey, I've taken a snapshot of your database, here's your manifest of the database. If I make a change to this file, it's not going to change the database. If I make a change to schema.rb and then run my migrations, that's still not going to change the database. This is just given to me from Active Record based on changes to the database that I defined in my migrations. These files, creating them and then running them, are the only ways that I'm going to make changes to the architecture of my database. When I run them, the schema gets printed out, but it's just a receipt. How baller would it be, though, to be like halfway out of Costco and just write like big screen TV on your receipt, and then it's like in your cart. It's like, you already highlight this. Like, you said this was all mine, so.
How about seeds? The seeds is like, you run it and it happens when you migrate and then never again.
So seeds, this is really just designed to be a file that helps people. Oh, and sorry, I was doing some other stuff in here for another thing. But the seed file is designed to run some stuff to put some things into your database. Generally, a seed file has a standardized way of doing that, that when you, like the goal of a seed file is, in your development app, if you need 10 books, 10 authors, and 30 chapters to cover your various cases that you want to test for and make sure that things hook up right, then the seed file should contain the instructions for creating those 50 records, such that when you send that repo to somebody else, all they have to do is run rake db seed, and now they're starting with the same kind of like patch of green grass as you start with when you do your code. That's kind of the goal of a seeds file, is to standardize the data that we use for testing and or development that lives inside of our app.
So when you do seeds, it just runs it.
It literally just runs the file one time. That's all it does. It's a shortcut for saying ruby db/seeds.rb. Yeah. If you read the instructions of that rake task, I'm pretty sure that's literally all that it says too. It's just run it. Like when you think about like rake console, right? That's not magic. That's literally just a pry session with a logger, right? In the context of all of our environment.
Could you do just pry that start instead of binding that pry?
In this context, we can. I'm not sure if I can always say it. And I think I'm not, off the top of my head, I couldn't really give a good, concise explanation of the difference.
So when you're going to make a change to the underlying database,
Yes.
just making simple changes within the migration file is enough?
So if I write a migration, then I've written a set of instructions that need to be run, but running the migration is what's going to change the database, right? So like right now I have this, let's say I have add column chapters author ID. If I set this to like writer ID instead, that's not going to change what's in my schema. I can also try to run my migrations again. It still says author ID there. If I try to run my migrations, oh yeah, enter then exit. Migrare. So notice it didn't like show any migrations actually running or any changes. I've run it, I go back to the schema, it still says author ID. That's because the version of this database right now is set to this timestamp. This timestamp is 1-to-1 with the last migration that we ran. This is 4202316. And when we look at our schema, 4202431. They've eliminated the final character there, but that's absolutely the timestamp that it's referring to. So any migration up to and including this one in this folder has already been run. And I can go in here and I can make any change that I want to the migration file, but it's not going to actually change my database. If I wanted to make this change, I would want to write a new migration saying like rename column chapters, comma, author ID, comma, writer ID to get that to line up that way. If I try to make changes in a migration after I've already run that migration, those changes won't take, and it's also going to be harder to roll back that migration. Because what happens if I do say this? Add column, and I rename it to writer ID. If I try to roll this back right now, what column is it going to try to remove? Based on the instructions of this migration, like as I've got it written right now, it's probably going to try to remove a column called writer ID because I changed it like without rolling back. So then I'm going to try to roll this back and it's going to say, hey, I don't even have a field called writer ID to remove, right? You ran into that yesterday, right? Because you had run a migration forward, then you changed code in the migration instruction, then you attempted to roll back, but since the code that you changed the reversal of the commands too, then it couldn't do the reversal of what you had written based on the old names of data still in the database. Yes. That'll do it, yep. And that's a quick and dirty way to do it. Consider cases where you couldn't do that in a workplace, right? Like, hey, I've got my client's credit card number or on this user account, and it took a while because we had to like convince the client to like share their information. We had explained to them that the API required like real small dollar transactions, and they were like, fine, I've got a business card, just like keep it good. And we went through a whole process to get it, right? You don't want to have another 45-minute like rigmarole between your PM and like the contacts and stuff just to get that data back. There's also just many other reasons why you wouldn't want to dump a database. Right, probably more than you can think of. So yeah, this is why we have this, like, you could almost see a one-to-one between like how Git is designed to work and how this is designed to work, right? We have kind of a chronological log of every individual change that's been made to something, whether it's a code repo or whether it's a database, right? This is kind of like the initial commit that we made to our database, the very first change. And then this is the next change. And if you called out like a git log, right, you'd see a whole bunch of commits and like their hash. And if we called like the git log for these migrations, we'd see lists of all the class names next to their timestamps. And then if we wanted to figure out what version are we actually on, we just look at the timestamp. And that's kind of, yeah. I think that the way that Active Record handles schema versioning is very similar to the way that Git handles it. I think that has more to do with just what best practices in versioning are than like one copied the other or anything like that.
So let's say we have an add column or a remove column, and then say we did want to change the name of the field.
Yes.
We would have to make a new file and then.
Yeah, new file and a rename column command, I think is how I'd do it. I think we did that. Did we do that? Or did we just, no, we did an add and a remove, but not a rename. So yeah, I think the command would be rename column. So if we go back here and look at books, let's say that instead of description, I think that it actually did come in as a snippet before, right? So what do we have? We had description in a few files. T.text description, we have new description here in the seeds file that we need to watch for. I think that's the only place though. New description, oh yeah, description. So this would need to change to snippet. And if we wanted to change the migration or the database field to snippet as well, we could make a new migration. Rename description to snippet on books. I know it's tedious, but when you write a migration, you should always name it according to this level of specificity. If there's a table being changed, if there's a field being changed, if you know the old value and the new value, just get all the details in there that you can. The only place that you're really allowed to be like less specific is if you're doing like a create table or a drop table, but we're still gonna say like create books or drop books is the name. Cool, so we'll rename the description to snippet. Beep, 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 beep. And the format here, I think, is table name, old column name, new column name. So, and rename column is the command. Rename column on the table books, where it is currently description, I want it to be snippet. Let me run a migrate. This should change the version of our schema to correspond with this new migrations timestamp, which ends in 21755. So now we look at our schema. Now books have a snippet, and our version is 21755. So that migration successfully changed the name. If I went to roll this back, right, because I provided the old name and the new name, it should be able to roll back one step. And after rolling back, we're on a previous version of our schema. We're back to description on books. And if we were to take a look here, that's our 2431. The remove column is the last one that we've run. We could also do it from the terminal by saying rake db migrate status.
If we didn't ever come back to that, do you just delete the create file?
Yeah, let's say that I didn't actually care about this rename, right? Like if I've not, as long as the status is down, you can delete a migration file without breaking your code base. If you delete a migration file where the status of that migration is up, that just sucks because it's going to look for exactly that same migration ID according to the date stamp. You'd have to like recreate a file with the exact same timestamp as what was. At that point, it's usually easier to just drop and recreate the database and start from scratch because you've probably made other errors in your judgment before that point.
If that's down too, and then we wanted to do another migration, would go another way, it would try and put it up again the next time we migrate, right?
Yeah, next time we run migrate, it's going to try to run that one forward. As long as the file is there and down, migrate is going to try to run anything that's down to up.
So if we wanted to do a migration for this, we would probably have to delete that. Create
Yeah,
file.
yeah.
We don't ever want to rename description snippet.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that if we wanted to not do the renaming of the description, if I wanted to go back to my seed file and unmake that change that I had just made in the commented code, which was here, switching that back to description. Sure, we can leave that. Now I've got description, and I want to go back to that way in my table, and so I take another quick look at my schema. I make sure that book, yep, that's description because we rolled this back. And then I go down here and I delete my migration file. Bye-bye. Yeah, trash it. Then we call migrate status. Now the only migration files that it sees are the remaining ones, and they all show as up, which means that now the next migration that I wrote would be the next down thing that Active Record is ready to switch on and update the schema with. Yeah.
Okay, so when you first write the migration file, the status is down.
Yes.
When you rerun a migration, it flips back to up.
Yes,
So
and once a migration flips from down to up, that's the signal that that migration change has happened to the database. Until it becomes up, that database does not reflect the reality of that
Okay, so
migration.
when it does a migration, it goes to all the migration files that are flagged as down.
Yes.
Follows the instructions in those files.
Yes.
So when we redo a migration, it's not going to remigrate based on the files we've already used.
That's right. You're never gonna like, if I had add column, for example, it's not gonna try to add a duplicate column if that column has already been added. And in fact, if I ran rakedb migrate right now, we can see we've got 5 migrations. None of them run. We're not going to get any sort of output indicating that a migration has successfully gone forward or backward. That's normally denoted by this, like, the equal sign banner kind of stuff happening. This is
So
like,
what would be the consequences of deleting the up flagged file? Would that mean you couldn't go back?
yeah, that would mean basically if I deleted this last remove authors column from books and then I tried to do a rollback, Active Record is going to look, because it knows that this is its current version and it also knows its whole version history. So let's say I deleted like these last 2 files and tried to roll back. First, Active Record would be like, I can't do that because I don't have a file with this timestamp on it. And the file needs to also be called remove authors column from books. So I'd need to basically recreate the file that I had deleted from scratch before I was able to roll that change back in the database. That's because under the hood, that change method is holding on to forward and backward instructions, and yeah, it's always trying to go backwards. according to how it went forwards when it ran the migration. And if it can't find the exact name and it can't run those instructions backwards when it does find the exact name and the exact timestamp, things get all wonky. Basically, yeah, just don't delete a migration file without like rolling that back.
And the migration timestamp is based on the name of the file. All that in there, right?
Migration name is all based on the name that I entered in. So when I said remove underscore authors underscore column from books,
But when it looks for if your migration finds those migration files and enters in the, like if you rename the thing, like what if you rename the file?
yeah, if I renamed my file with a different date stamp, it's not going to be able to find that one
Oh,
anymore.
just when you find
Yeah.
it, okay.
Active record isn't smart, right? It's just a good pattern matcher. If we violate these patterns the same way as if we like have a plural in a belongs to, right? That similar thing where active record's like, I can do the job according to specifications, but if you change anything about it, I'm like somebody on a cash register app for like the first time, and then somebody's like, I want to add cheese, and it's like, I don't know how to go outside the parameters I was specifically given for this. I think that's how active record is. It's a very eager worker, but it's not creative and it's not nuanced or human. It just makes assumptions based on typically conventionally good ways of naming things and pointing at different stuff. But yeah, if you try to get manual with your like migration stuff, you should probably know what you're doing, or at least
Not turn on power, by the way.
yeah, I know.
Okay, sorry.
Or you should recognize that you're, or you should recognize I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm explicitly going to spend some time spinning wheels so I can learn more about how this stuff works under the hood by hitting these brick walls and such. I feel confident to talk about these hypotheticals because they're not hypotheticals to me, because like each one of these things has cost me at least an hour of time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I will stop the recording right here just to make sure that I have a clean stop
Figure out
point.
that this is code.